Now then, welcome along to the Huddle Breakdown as we look back on Celtic's 4-3 win away to Hearts in Tynecastle. A game that was dominated by one thing and one thing only, and that was VAR, which made its triumphant debut at the weekend. And needless to say, it was very, 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 very busy at the weekend. Alan Morrison and Jico James are with me. We'll start off, Alan. I mean, it was a debut to remember, at least. At least you can say that when it comes to VAR in Scotland.
Yes, I mean, and possibly, unfortunately, in some respects, for the officials, there was just an awful lot of need to refer to it. And listen, there was a lot of things that happened that I would suggest are normal in the sense of this was people, human beings getting used to new technology, a new set of processes being used under pressure in a highly competitive environment for the first time, and therefore mistakes will be made. So specifically, the amount of time it took some of the decisions to be made, the fact that on the Hearts' first penalty, possibly, and I'm surmising here, possibly, Nick Walsh has lost a bit of self-confidence because of already some of the incidents have occurred and doesn't give the penalty, and then we have to wait sort of nearly 3 minutes for the actual penalty to be taken. So listen, these are things which are going to take time to iron out. And as I say, I'm trying to be charitable here in terms of probably normal, really. I mean, I would even go so far as to say is the Ralston goal that was disallowed. If I was being charitable, I would say that what Walsh did was wrongly whistle for a free kick that he imagined he had seen, rather than what he should have done, which is just let the play develop. Celtic scored a goal, and then you sort it out, and that's a good use of VAR. So he made a mistake. He did the wrong thing. Well, he made two mistakes. He made a mistake thinking that Giakoumakis had fouled somebody, which he clearly hadn't, and he then made a mistake by blowing his whistle before the play. Now, if I was being uncharitable, I would say he found a way to stop a dangerous situation. If I was being charitable, I would say he just forgot himself and didn't realize, and he made a mistake basically, and screwed up, right? And if that is the case, you have to say it was just a human error. But there were other decisions, shall we say, that perhaps I could be less charitable about.
Yeah, so I've got them listed down in front of them. We'll go around them when we get a chance. So we have obviously the handball that's doing the rounds that wasn't given to Celtic. Ralston's goal, which you mentioned, where he blows early and there was a foul in the build-up by Giakoumakis. The Hearts penalty, number one, Hearts penalty number two, and Abada's goal at the end, which was probably the right decision, but we'll talk about that later on. What's interesting to me is that quite a lot of Celtic fans don't actually watch the Premier League, so they have not experienced what VAR was like for the last number of years. So I'll shed some light on that. It was like this to begin with, where there were long decisions, long waits, long stoppages in play, because the referees wanted to make sure they got the decision correct, or at least close to correct. And there were a few teething issues and a few wrong decisions here and there. So I'm willing to give it a little bit of leeway, but I'm an anti-VAR man anyway in terms of what it does to football, regardless of whether they take long or a short time to come to those decisions. But James, I guess one question to be asked here is, how much do you think this is in general going to impact the way that Celtic and other teams play their football? Do you think it's going to change it overall, or do you think it's going to make it a little bit more level, or how do you think it's going to actually impact on games? Because it is having, we're seeing, it was used widely across Scotland this weekend.
Yeah, I'd say negligible outside of the purveyors of the dark arts. So the people that might be a little bit crossing that line and being aggressive and holding and pulling on corners and set pieces, that kind of thing. My guess is those would be the people that are probably most, and again, outside of the normal kind of just Celtic specific issues that we come back to. So yeah, I mean, generally that would probably be the one area. Outside of that, I mean, I don't think you can really do anything different, because really what it's about is in theory, is about trying to get the calls more correct. And the problem I see here is that you're getting decades long distrust and bad quality officiating, which kind of spin in amongst itself, right? So it's hard to pull that stuff out and assign how much is just they're terrible and how much of it's other stuff. And there's probably been plenty of that historically. And then you get a game like this weekend, which was just a chaotic mess in a glorious way. I mean, it was one of the most entertaining games we'll probably get to watch in the season, just because of how crazy it was. And, you know, people end up just kind of confirming biases their way through it. And you throw on top of that, and I throw my hand up here, I don't think the average supporter understands the rules that well.
Absolutely not.
Right.
No way. Yeah. No, not a chance.
Right. So, you know, to me, the one call of the whole game where I kind of try to step back, as I try to do, as a, you know, in the capacity that we try to focus on this show, which is try to be objective. The one, and I don't know the rule. I know that the rule has been debated and changed 80 million times, apparently, which is the handball rule. And that's the call to me when you see it. You're just like, well, that's ridiculous. But there's subjectivity to that interpretation of that rule. So if there's, again, that's a perfect example where you have all these externalities of baggage between competence and either justified or unjustified paranoia of whoever is involved on both, you know, all sides. And you just throw that kind of play into the mix, and it's like you can just make it into whatever you want to. To me, it looked clear that it was a handball, should have been a penalty. But again, I'm not a rules expert. I don't know. Yeah. Like I could see that was how far is too far from the body. I mean, that's, you know, what is that? Outside of that, I think pretty much, to Alan's point, the Ralston call looked to me like a human error. That, and again, I having been a huge fan of North American sports that adopted all this stuff a long time ago, you know, it's going to take a while for people to understand what's reviewable and what's not, and the sequencing of these things, right? So this has been evident in the NFL for like 15 years now, which is what, you know, you get certain plays and stuff that wasn't reviewable, even if a coach's challenge comes in, as they call it. And you just drop dead, don't review it. It's in the rules. You can't do it. So the fact that he blew that dead, that means it's not reviewable, is my understanding of it.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Right. So it's not a VAR thing. It was a bad officiating thing, which we go back to the fact that happens all the time. So it's not, you know, again, now you start getting that clouded in with this as a VAR problem. Outside of the time, the only thing I saw that was an issue with VAR was the handball call. And I don't know.
You see,
I mean, it seemed ridiculous, but I don't know what that is.
Yeah. Well, this is the catch-22 of VAR, is that one of the reasons it was brought in was to stop the endless conversation about referees' decisions and it's
never going to happen.
Take the flack off them. It actually makes it much
like pouring
worse.
Gasoline on it. That's what it's going to do. That's what I've tweeted.
You're even seeing
pouring gasoline on an already burning fire.
Yeah, you're seeing conspiracy theories now for Premier League referees, and that hasn't been a thing, but that's starting to build theories now around the Premier League as well. Interesting on the handball front, Dermot Gallagher, who does the Ref Watch, it's a terrible segment on Sky Sports, but they do it anyway. Nine times out of 10, regardless of what happens, he agrees with the referee's decision. And I was watching the one on Celtic that they did, and they were talking about the handball, and Dermot Gallagher kept saying, in the Premier League, I think that's given. And then the presenter's still presses him 3 times. But do you think it's a handball, though? And he is so reluctant to say, yes, it's a handball. The referee got it wrong. He's like, he just keeps saying, in the Premier League, it's a handball. So, yeah.
That's because that rule is so effed up right now. It leaves so much for interpretation. There's no, you know, black and white about what's a handball. It's like a Jackson Pollock painting.
Yes, listen. All the laws around foul play are subject to subjectivity, right? What is it? And this we'll come back to this in terms of that alleged Giakoumakis foul, because what is a trend, absolutely a trend, is the standard to which Celtic are being penalised for contact versus the standard that opponents are being held to for contact. Okay, and that's wholly subjective and open to interpretation as to how much contact is a foul, right? But let me come back to the handball rule, because this one's actually quite clear. And now listen, as people know, I'll refer these things to Yorkshire Whistler, and he is an expert. He's a paid professional that referees and knows the laws inside out and gives detailed explanations rooted in the wording of the laws as to why, what to back up his decision. And I'm sure that will be the case on this one, and I haven't heard it back from him. But I'm just looking at Law 12, and the first part of Law 12 says, handling the ball, it is an offence if a player deliberately touches the ball with their hand arm. For example, moving the hand arm towards the ball. This is an example of that. When the ball comes in, Smith's arms are tucked into his body. When Taylor plays the ball, Smith's left arm comes out and the ball hits it. He moves his arm to the ball. I'm sure his brain didn't say, let's give away a penalty, I'm going to give it away. But a bit like Enda's brain on Friday night when his conscious brain said, I'm not going to have that last beer, but his unconscious brain says, yes, you are. So Michael Smith's unconscious brain probably stuck his arm out naturally to stop the ball going into the penalty area. I'm sure he didn't try and give away a penalty. But nevertheless, it's pretty well covered by Law 12, and in fact, it's the first sentence. To me, that's black and white, and doesn't require any subjectivity at all.
No.
The question is, given the view that Nick Walsh had of it, which was exemplary, and given the ability of then VAR to study it from multiple angles, why was it not at least suggested to Walsh that he may want to look at it again? Because clearly it falls within the law of being a clear handball offence, and that is the worry. That is the worry. If someone has just decided, I'm not giving that. I'm not giving it. I'm not giving it. Right? And this comes back to, you mentioned the word trust. Okay, this comes back to trust. So this has got nothing to do with VAR. This has got to do with the individuals who've been placed in those positions of responsibility to undertake these roles. Okay, and on Saturday we had a referee who works as a PE teacher in a school where he teaches academy kids from Rangers. Okay, so he has a commercial relationship. He's involved in a commercial relationship with Rangers Football Club. He wears Rangers Football Club branded clothing while he undertakes his duties that he gets paid for with the Rangers Academy kids. Why is he put in that situation where his integrity can be questioned? I'm not saying he's biased. I'm not saying he's a Rangers fan. I don't know. But clearly there's a conflict of interest there, and clearly that erodes trust and transparency in who is refereeing these games, because there is a commercial relationship between that person and Celtic's biggest rivals. Similarly, the person who ultimately decided not even to ask Walsh to look at it is Stephen McLean. Stephen McLean's brother played for Rangers. Nothing I'm saying here isn't in the public domain. These are all facts. I'm not making up lies about he supports this and blah 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 and he's a prod and he hates that, this, that, and that. None of that. This is all factual stuff, right? Brian McLean played for Rangers. Brian McLean is Stephen McLean's brother. Okay, that means he has a strong family connection to Rangers Football Club. Now, we need to have people in charge of games where their personal integrity should not be challenged. It's not fair to them. Would you want to be put in a position where your integrity and honesty can be challenged because of something in the past or some relationship that you have? That's why you have declarations about commercial relationships, and MPs have to declare what commercial relationships they have. It's to have that transparency and to avoid the people making assumptions or jumping to conclusions that actually you're doing things out of dishonesty or for other reasons that we can't see. It's to protect the employees, in this case the referees, as much as it is to protect the integrity of the game. And that doesn't happen in Scotland. I don't think there's another league in Europe where referees are not required to declare their allegiance to a football club. Now think about that in the context of Scottish football, okay? In Scotland, and again, you can challenge this, but because this isn't a fact, this isn't my opinion, but I would imagine if you looked at the population of people in Scotland who like football, okay, I'm going to go out on a bit of a limb and say roughly a third of them will support the Rangers, roughly a third of them will support Celtic, and roughly a third of them will support other teams. And attendance records would kind of back that up. Okay, you're drawing your population of referees and linespeople from that same community. Okay, so add to that the toxicity of the rivalry between those two clubs, and it's not like me. So, for example, I live in Sheffield, okay, and I like Sheffield United, and I go to Bramall Lane, okay, but I wasn't born in Sheffield. I didn't go to school with kids from Sheffield. I have no animosity towards Sheffield Wednesday at all. I like to see United win. I'm not bothered what happens to Wednesday at all. If you put me in charge of a Sheffield Wednesday game, I would just referee as best as I possibly could. But if you put me in charge of a Rangers game, then I might be very professional and I might try my best to be as balanced as I can be. But I'm a human being, and every single human being, including Scottish referees, are subject to unconscious bias. Okay? But why put somebody in that situation in the first place? So, I mean, what little trust that people had in Scottish football kind of died in 2012. The trust in referees has never been there for the reasons that I've said. The Scottish FA do not protect their own employees by removing claims of lack of integrity and of bias, because by the way that they don't declare their agencies and so forth, and the way that they assign them. They don't protect their own employees. And so that trust isn't there. We don't trust what we're seeing. And therefore people jump to conclusions. Oh, he gave that because he's a Rangers fan. So to me, you had two people in charge where you can say, public data, right? There's a verifiable relationship and a verifiable conflict of interest. And you shouldn't be putting these people in that situation. And that will never change. It will never change until that changes. I don't care how many cameras you've got. I don't care what technology you use. That'll never change unless you change that.
I'm not sure it's as straightforward as you're making out, because, like, fair enough, there's a third of, like, your breakdown's probably correct, but I mean, it's difficult enough to get referees that are qualified to referee at this level in Scotland. They're struggling to have referees in England, let alone in Scotland. I think it's borderline impossible not to find something about somebody, any referee that isn't connected to either Celtic or Rangers, be that a first cousin, second cousin, niece or nephew, has played for the club or played for the academy or teaches one of the kids or teaches the son of John Lundstrom in the school. I think it's just, going to be that really difficult. They're picking from a pretty small pool. But I totally buy into what you're saying. It is like they are in the firing line for a reason.
You've got to try, but you can't just throw up your hands and go.
I know that.
We just throw up our hands and go.
Yeah.
It'll never work, because probably, and let me be practical about it. Do you want your best referees to not be able to referee games involving the top two clubs? They probably, like you say, is that an attractive proposition to recruit the best talent? But I think there's ways around that in terms of you recognise that some referees are never going to referee Celtic or the Rangers. Nevertheless, in all other respects, these are excellent referees, and therefore you're going to go to my recommended list of people that do UEFA games, and then your career can develop in that way. There's ways around it, I'm sure.
Just to move on,
if I could, just real quick, if I could circle back to it, and I don't mean to be, well, I do, because I'm an a-hole, but with Alan saying that the handball rule is clear. It's particularly that first part of, what you call Section 12. Is that what it is?
It's Law 12.
Yeah, Law 12.
It's the laws of football, not the rules of football.
Oh, I'm sorry. Apologies.
I've learned one thing from the Yorkshire.
So, one of my favorite ones going back in the NFL was, what's a fumble, right? And you would think, well, it's as long as the guy's arm or knee isn't on the ground and the ball comes out, it's a fumble. Like, how hard can that be? Well. What if it's a catch and then he doesn't take two steps? And then they came up with these different ways to qualify what it is. And then it came down to, they have to make a football move after securing possession, and then that's when they have possession long enough for it to be a fumble, right? So the reason why I get into that, it sounds like it should be simple. And when you say, well, it's a hand going towards the ball, is there not a section that also says like an unnatural football move? Isn't that like a later part?
Unnatural
Yeah,
position,
Unnatural position,
is
right?
what-
And then
and
right, and then you have like the distance from the body, right? So again, I agree with you viewing it. It looks like, because I just rewatched it when you were talking. It looks like he swung his arm, but how do you prove intent? Like, was that an unnatural?
It doesn't
movement?
matter.
It doesn't
It
matter.
does not matter.
There's no.
It doesn't matter anymore. It just has to be in an unnatural position. Doesn't matter if he was jumping or landing or anything. If he had his
No, what
arm
I'm saying, this
out of a
this is
natural
like a
position.
theoretical physics discussion. Was that unnatural to you? I don't know. Was it unnatural to me? Was it?
I don't think it was unnatural, but he moved. But he fails the first test, which is, and I'm just looking at it chronologically.
But,
the order.
but what's the
thing is
word?
described.
Read that again, Alan. Read it again.
Okay. Handling the ball. This is handling the ball under law 12, right? For the purposes of determining handball offences, the upper boundary of the arm is in line with the bottom of the armpit. Not every touch of a player's hand arm with the ball is an offence. It is an offence if a player, and these aren't numbered, but this is the first bullet point, deliberately touches the ball with their hand arm, for example.
Right. So what's the key word in that sentence?
Well, it says deliberately, which is impossible. So that's a standard you can't ever reach, right?
That's my point.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the subjectivity.
So let's
part.
accept that this is fundamentally flawed, because that word sets a standard that unless you can decipher the electronic messages in somebody's brain, you cannot say.
So that's what I'm saying. The way you characterize it as being black and white and straightforward, it is inherently not because of that word.
Yeah, but the bit that you can is the next bit. It says, for example, moving the hand arm towards the ball.
Yeah, he was Liam Gallaghering it with the
deliberately. So that's the key. That moving
the
hand towards the ball has to be deliberate.
Well, of course it was deliberate, because he did it. I mean, like I said to you, that's why I was trying to make a bit of a joke. But I was actually deadly serious. As I say,
what I'm saying is that leaves if you're going to get into the conspiratorial stuff, that's the kind of subjective interpretation of things where you have to try and project what somebody's intent was, and then measure how far away from the body was it, and was it in an unnatural position. Right there, those are three subjective characterizations in one rule that you can drive a truck through as far as how you can just make stuff up if you want to. And that's, to me, that's a complete disaster. That's what I'm saying. You pour gasoline onto the fire, because no matter what happens, people are going to see a different reality and interpret those things the way they want to. And unless they simplify this rule and say, if it hits you, unless it's off your own body, if it hits a hand, it's a handball.
Well, they did that. They did that in Spain for.
No, I know. That's what I'm saying.
And it was horrendous. Yeah,
I know. So it's going to be an issue with it. There's lesser evils here, right?
Sure.
So
Okay, so listen. I think the good point well made that I'm taking from what you've said, and I agree with, is that all of the laws, okay, are worded in such a way that you always have this subjectivity, and in the space where that subjectivity can exist, come these other elements that I'm talking about. We're putting people who are conflicted into positions where their unconscious bias can interpret that in a certain way. Okay, and we know which way that is. Predominantly,
I would also say incompetent people, because they're just not ready to use this technology either. I mean, we can talk all day about biases and all that. They're also just bad referees. We see.
No, but it is related. No, but it is related.
It is related.
I'm absolutely. It's almost willfully not a professional setup. Okay. Yeah, I mean, we could go on about this for hours, but the fundamental problem for me is that there's no separation of duty and control between the Scottish Football Association and the provision of refereeing services to the professional game. You need to treat it like a service provision model, and you organise itself accordingly. And that's one step, okay? But then you've got to have a professional way of recruiting, hiring people. Whereas the way that it happens in Scotland is, oh, he's a good lad, I know him, he's all right. Or you get Willie Collum. Oh, let's have the token Catholic. I'm joking. I'm not joking, right? To bolster the numbers, but it's so you don't recruit based on who's the best referee. You recruit based on other criteria, because it's an unprofessional, boys' club mentality that runs that side of the game. If you made it professional and accountable and transparent, and it reported to the football teams whose services they are providing to, and with clear criteria for performance evaluation, you start to get a professionally run body.
That would take effort and time, though, Alan. That's the key point.
And money probably as well. Yeah.
Let's move on from the handball decision, because there's another couple, and we won't actually talk the entire podcast about VAR because there was an actual game in between it all. But just for some clarity on a few things, because there were a couple of decisions that people were confused with and what the protocol was on certain things. So the Ralston goal we've covered, it is just he blows early and that's it. There's nothing VAR can do in that situation. The Abada offside, I'll just finish this off. Because a lot of people were confused why the lines weren't shown on Sky. Now, this doesn't provide clarity because we don't actually know what version of VAR we're getting at the minute in Scotland because it's still in early days. But we do have a VAR light, so to speak, with it doesn't have goal line technology, so there is questions whether or not we're getting the full package and whether or not we're getting the same VAR that we're getting for the Premier League. For the line situation, so when VAR first came in to the Premier League a couple of years ago, for the first 2 years, it was up to the broadcasters to show you the line and show it on screen. Whereas now they just get the final product. They don't see the referees coming to the decision of offside. It's just the final product with the onside offside decision on screen. We don't know whether Sky are using that version or using the old version, but we'll probably find that out in the coming weeks. But that's what the Abada situation was about. I just want to touch on the Hearts penalty, the one that Cameron Carter-Vickers gives away. So, my initial thoughts on this was, that's fair enough. That's a penalty. There's clear movement in the ball goes forward. When I rewatched it again, Devlin goes into that challenge with his studs up and collides with Cameron Carter-Vickers. Now, I can see both sides of this argument. 100%, I can see why it was given as a penalty. But I was also questioning, is the initial foul not him going in with his studs up in the air like that?
I think they both do. So, I think it's one of those where, similar to where a defender's holding an attacker and an attacker's holding a defender, the referee just goes, you're both coming in at the same height, so I'm not going to penalise one over the other. So I thought that was a good example of VAR because it showed quite clearly that Devlin got a touch on the ball, fraction of a second before Carter-Vickers, and then Carter-Vickers collided with Devlin's foot. So I thought that was fair enough. It just took them a long time to come to that decision, but then to be fair, it was probably the first big call and penalty call that they had to deal with. So I'm kind of okay with that. But the one other point that I would make about that was that if you watch when the penalty is actually taken, Snodgrass encroaches into the box before any Celtic defender. A Hearts player encroaches into the box, and that wasn't an issue, but it became an issue for the second penalty. And it's things like that people sort of, again, fall back to, well, why is it an issue with one and not the other? Is it incompetence? Or, again, the door is open because of the reasons that I've said. Is it for another reason?
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the football match, because I didn't actually get to see this live. I was, as you can probably tell from my voice, I was out on a long weekend for a stag do. So I was missing this game live and rewatched it. And I guess my main point with all of this, and it always comes back to what I hold to be the correct way of looking at football, and what I was brought up to believe was the correct way to looking at football, was that fair enough, referee can 100% impact games, and VAR impacts games massively as well. But I always find the argument that a referee lost you a game to be a little bit pitiful, because I think you should be good enough to put enough difference between you and the team that you're playing in your performance into it so that those things don't matter. Fair enough, they might get a penalty, they might score a goal, the momentum might shift in certain ways, so it does impact. But I think that you should always be better than the team enough to give yourself leeway that the referee makes an absolute shocker of a decision and gives the team a penalty that's not a penalty. So what about Celtic's performance in this? It obviously was good enough to beat VAR and Hearts, as Chris Sutton said after the game, but conceding 3 goals as well is probably not ideal. If you could sum up Celtic's performance in this game, James, how would you do it?
Generally, I mean, again, you have to, relative to the standards that we've set under Ange, I think objectively it was bad. I think we were very fortunate given all of the context, right? So again, the idea that we should have had a penalty and should have had another goal with Ralston. Even with that context, we had some problems with how Hearts played for, let's say, the first hour until they ran out of gas. And they dominated a pretty decent stretch of that game. And I said, relatively speaking, right? So we're not going to get dominated in a, Real Madrid last 40 minutes against Hearts. But this was the kind of game that it was going to happen. I mean, in that small pitch, they came out, they've had a rough stretch. They have been not having a great, season so far. So I think they really came in kind of guns blazing, and they really came after us, and they pressed and they pressed, and they were reasonably effective in it until they got tired, and really, highlighted some of the structural weaknesses that we've talked about in prior shows. So, the irony of this is we almost Real Madrid them, kind of, meaning that in the last 35, 40 minutes is when we really took over the game after they kind of sputtered out. And, from then on, it was, us being pretty dominant. I think the other thing is that just from a, again, I always go back to Alan's trademarked or copyrighted, whatever it is, toxic combinations. And given the nature of the game, given that first 60 minutes, we didn't have a lot of stability on the ball in the game. So if you think about having, let's say, Maeda over Hack, I'm going to call them Hacks, Bernabe over Taylor, Giacomakis over Kyogo, that Ralston over Juranovic, like any of those individually, it's okay. But if you take them all together, they're not quite as secure on the ball as the other people that could have played for them. And you kind of got this, pinball machine action that was going on with how intense they were pressing, and we're giving the ball away a little bit or a lot at times, and having trouble with the press. And it was like, okay, it was a bit of a mess, I think, because of that. But the combination of them tiring, us making substitutions where we, diluted some of those problems to a significant degree, and then we kind of took over in that last half hour in particular. So, yeah, to me, it echoed very differently, but when I was trying to think, I was like, when's the last time we kind of had a game like this? I was thinking it was like the Motherwell 4-3 game. I think it was 16-17. I think it was at that season, or 17. I think it was 16-17, where you kind of had that same kind of vibe of a game. And we came back more in that one, but a lot of that kind of pinball kind of action going on. And that's not going to happen that often because of the nature of that pitch and them having some decent athleticism at some positions. And hopefully we're just not going to be that horrible that often.
Well, there was a lot of changes to this game, to the team going into this game, and I suppose most notably was the two fullbacks. Anthony Ralston came in at right back with Bernabe at left back, and just going off what people were saying, Bernabe didn't seem to have his best game, and the starting lineup didn't seem to suit the way that Hearts played against us more than anything. I'm just reading Owen Brown's piece on The Athletic where he breaks down the sort of spatial issues that Celtic had throughout the game between certain players and the way that Hearts played against us. So, Alan, do you want to give your summation of how or why Celtic struggled in this game, especially in the first half, where they only created, I think it was 0.12 XG or something in the first half, despite scoring a goal?
Yeah, and listen, I need to be careful, and I'm talking to myself as much as anyone else about, falling back into the, we made lots of changes, therefore we didn't play well type of argument. Because if you look back over the last 5 games in reverse order, the number of changes to lineup has been 6, 5, 5, 4-6, right? And some of those games have been pretty comprehensive wins. So that in and of itself isn't a reason for not playing coherently.
It's also the same changes all the time as well. It's not. It's like an A and a B team. It's not as if he's changing people and putting Ralston at left back and putting Aaron Moy up as a right winger or anything. It's pretty consistent.
No, I mean they're consistent, and the, because of injuries as well. The people who you might have thought were in that B list are now in the A list sort of thing and getting decent runs like Jens and Moy probably just to pick two up. But I think there was a little bit of the toxic combination came into play. I didn't think it was so much a general thing. I thought it was a very specific thing, which was the left-hand side, because you had Bernabé and Maeda. Now, Maeda is not a player who's going to show for the ball midway into the opposition half and be like Jota, collect it, drop a shoulder, take somebody on, and progress the ball. He's either going to all he's going to do is he's going to give it back to you, right? At best. Right, what he wants to do is he wants to run onto the ball that you pass through to him, and that opportunity. They were so deep. Their back line was so deep that kind of got negated. And then you had Bernabé, who really, unfortunately, showed all of his downsides in this game to quite an absolutely alarming degree. I've not done the whole game. I've only done half the game, but already 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times. 8 times he lost possession of the ball in the first half on that side. 2 of those times they ended up with shots at goal, including the Snodgrass chance came off of his just dumb throw-in to Hatate that was easily intercepted. 8 times he either lost challenges in his own half or gave the ball away in his own half. And as I say, 2 of them were directly led to chances. And so, when he's got somebody ahead of it, and you could see from that, you could see he was getting, his confidence was going, and every time he got the ball, all he was trying to do was get rid of it as quickly as possible. And having somebody like Maeda in front of you is not a great aid to that. Maeda's not particularly secure on the ball, and he's not going to really do anything extravagant in terms of finding pockets of space or being open in a great position. So I thought that was a real weakness in the team, and it was one of the reasons why we struggled to get any momentum into our build-up play, and there was an awful lot of passing between Jens and Carter Vickers. The other reason, the other main weakness I think we had was that Matt O'Reilly just had I think a really poor game. Another way to say it, really, his movement wasn't great. He was static, and this is when we talk about McGregor and what his strengths are. McGregor's always in motion. He's always looking to receive the ball. He's already moving when he receives the ball. His body is already in the right position. He's either on the turn or on the half turn, and he's looking forward. O'Reilly is a bit more ponderous. He's not receiving the ball when he's moving. He's receiving his ball with a closed body position, and he simply isn't moving fast enough on his feet. And so he was getting closed down a lot. I mean, we actually gave up a couple of chances in that first half because O'Reilly got caught centrally as well. So again, the combination of things. And then on the other side, they pressed quite effectively. And Ralston, bless him, uncomplicated football, and I don't mean that as a criticism. I mean he doesn't overcomplicate the game. Whenever he was put under pressure, he just launched it up the line, and then inevitably 9 times out of 10 you kind of give the ball away. So that was just Hearts. I think to my mind, I thought Hearts were sharper in their press. They were quicker off the ball, and they were also quicker with the ball as well than Celtic. Celtic were too slow in possession in comparison, and that led to them, if not dominating the game, certainly just making it a horrible, scrappy, error-strewn game. And I know you might think, it's 4-3, and for a neutral, it must have been amazing, and it was dramatic. But in terms of quality on the ball, it was a terrible game of football. There were so many turnovers. So fair play to them, and I would say fair play to them throughout the game. I thought they simplified. I talk about this quite a lot because I think it's important. They simplified their game. They've had 11 defeats in 15 games. They're on a really bad run. Confidence is low. They've had a lot of injury problems, especially in defence. They made the game as uncomplicated as they could. It was signposted before the game. Cochrane said they'll take yellow cards. Their smirking idiot of a manager, Nielsen, talked about making contact before the match. We all know what that is code for. But fair play to them. They played a very simple, but they played it very well. So it's the same as St Mirren did when we played them. I'm not damning with faint praise. I genuinely mean they had a strategy and they executed it very effectively. But they did tire. They're not used to pressing with 60% of the ball, not having the ball for 60% of the time, sort of thing. So inevitably they tired, and I think Celtic actually could have eased to victory by more goals, and I think James is spot on in that one. So yeah, I think it was a horrible, it was a intensely frustrating game to watch if you're like me and focusing on the performance. It was just so many poor things, so many, and a lot of it was just down to the basic contrast and tempo of how the two teams played.
So I'll throw in a couple of fun stats then. So the running theme that I've been on lately. So the ball in play time was under 47 minutes.
Horrible.
So and that was with how much time added with all of that. So
for context, it was like 60 against RB Leipzig, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, Real Madrid was, I think, 61, which was high. I mean, that's a high number. So we're domestically we're more in the 53 to 55 range. So good bit below that, and that again speaks to the pinball action that was going on. And then the other one was they pressed us. So the pressures is a metric that that StatsBombs keeps, and they had 139 pressures. So again, to put that into context. And they were relatively effective. So they had 29 recoveries. So it's about a 21% recovery rate, if you want to call it that. That's the highest an opponent has had this season by a pretty decent margin. The only one that's even close was Rangers, which again, you would think, given the relative quality in athletes and players. Back to, we've been relatively praising of O'Reilly in that role up until this game, I think. And I think part of that, in hindsight now, is this is the first team to actually put any pressure on him in that position of any significant degree. So again, to go back to the Leipzig game, they only had 80 pressures in the whole game. So 80 versus 139. There's a difference in possession, but they weren't man marking him. They weren't pressing him that heavily when he did get time. So he had that kind. We talked about it last week. When he squares up and he's got time on the ball to pick out passes, he's quite good at that. And I think what Hearts, again, to their credit, what they decided to do was put some of these guys under pressure. And again, the compression of the pitch size really, I think, helps that. So that made it quite uncomfortable for him and some of the other guys as well, I think. So again, I thought that the ball and play time and the number of pressures and their effectiveness were pretty good indicators as far as, again, the first kind of 50 to 55 minutes where it was quite uncomfortable.
I think it's probably down to injuries more than anything else, injuries and the amount of games they're playing and the different standards of games that they're playing. But it is interesting that probably the last time that you could say 9 out of the 11 starting players had a really good game was probably the win against Rangers earlier on the season. I think there's been quite a number of games recently enough, especially that could be, fogging my memory, just the fact that Celtic haven't been taking over all that great, is that you have one or two.
Could have been all the brain cells you killed this weekend too.
Well, it also could have been that. One or two players playing really well, 2 or 3 playing middling okay, and then the rest are kind of, like Rio Hatate last week just had a really bad game. So kind of seems that way with the likes of Bernabe and a couple of others. And what's funny is that when Celtic have 9 or 10 good players on the pitch playing well, usually it ends up 4 or 5-0. So I think that's probably where we're seeing some of the drop in performances and drop in general, probably performance of the entire team rather than individual performances. And I don't think it's any coincidence that the worst performances have come before and after Champions League games. I genuinely think there is something in that. Whether it's mentality, whether it's, maybe O'Reilly's just hoping he's not going to get injured before the Shakhtar game or anything like that. Could be a number of things. Could be the training that they do in the build-up, but I don't think it's a coincidence that they are playing badly before and after Champions League games this year.
Yeah, listen, I mean, even though Celtic have got clearly, enormous resources compared to most of the teams in the league and more players in the squad and of a better quality, etc., they are playing a tremendous amount of games. And whilst that isn't degrading their ability to win football matches at SPFL level, it does degrade the quality of the product, if I can put it that way, on the pitch in terms of the consistency of performance. This is the point I kept coming back to, is that consistency that we saw over the second half of last season. And that was mainly driven despite the fact, partly because of the fact that Postecoglou was only really using 17 players for the last half of the season. So there was a tremendous consistency of selection there, and the players were getting used to each other, and therefore there was a consistency of performance that followed. This season, we saw the first sort of, I think, 5 games of the season or 7 games of the season actually, where we were playing 1 game a week. And we saw an incredible consistency of performance. The team didn't change particularly, apart from that Ross County League Cup game, and then back again for the derby that followed it. But then since then, we've had to change the team a lot. Injuries have mounted up. There's been a lot of travelling involved. So no excuses in terms of poor Celtic for that. I'm just saying it inevitably has to impact on the coherence of the performance, even though we've still been getting the results.
Yeah, I think one extra point I would make before we move on to the Shakhtar game tomorrow is that while it is just still October, in reality, we're in December when it comes to the football that we're playing at the minute. That's where we are with the football season. We are in what would normally be the December slug, where you're just trying to get wins, you're trying to get performances. It really is like they're just playing that many games to try to get it done before this World Cup happens, that it feels like this is the period where Celtic normally start hitting their groove, when in reality terms, I'd say a lot of these players are just on their last legs like they would be normally coming up to the Christmas season. But
I was just going to say
ahead,
that the other variable here is that I think Hearts finishing 3rd last season was a bit flattering in the sense.
2 words, Craig Gordon.
Well, right. Craig Gordon had a good shot-stopping season. They were, I think, 7th or 8th in non-penalty XG conceded. So, again, given their resources and where they're at in the league, that's not a good defending team. We talked about that last season. They are now last in the league in non-penalty XG conceded, and it's actually not that close. They're at 183 per game. So that, we talk about Celtic in Europe, and when you get up close to that 2 goals, 2 in XG conceded, how difficult it is to win. And, even a team like Hearts in our league, you can't concede that amount in chances. And that's why they're hemorrhaging goals. And Gordon hasn't been as good this season yet. Maybe he won't be, we'll see. But so yeah, he kind of bailed them out to a degree last season, and this season is just pretty much a train wreck.
Mm-hmm. So just to finish off the podcast, then, the reason we're recording this on a Monday is because we're playing in the Champions League tomorrow night against Shakhtar at home. This is the one that we have to win. I mean, this is the one that I've had shoehorned. I had Shakhtar away shoehorned as one we had to win, but I think I will be very, very upset tomorrow night, regardless of the performance, if Celtic don't beat this Shakhtar's team at home. How are we feeling about this game?
Yeah, I'm pretty nervous, actually. I mean, I don't want to fall into the trap, and again, I'm speaking as much to myself as anyone else here. You look at the performance data from that game away in Warsaw, and you think, well, Celtic were by miles the better team, and we clearly should have won that match by all the indicators. And yes, but they didn't. But the problem is, at this level, is just as likely that they could turn up tomorrow and play bloody well, right? And they could almost do the same to us as what we played in Warsaw, because they're just a good team full of good footballers and internationalists and so forth. So I'm hopeful. I don't think Donetsk are I think their away results, I might be wrong in this, I'm sure someone will correct me, I don't think their away results are tremendous. I don't think they travel that well. And I think, it's been obviously it's a difficult time for them as players, as humans, emotionally as well as physical, as Champions League campaign, playing their domestic campaign with everything that's going on in their lives and so forth. So, I can't imagine it'll be the best of them that we'll see in that regard. But having said all that, if we don't play very, very well, and they play as well as they can do, we could easily get hammered, to be honest. So I'm kind of expecting us to win. We have to, I'm hoping that we put on a performance that is, again, showing progress is really what I'm looking for. And if we do that, will it be enough to get a result against this team? I certainly hope so, but it wouldn't shock me if it was if it went bad.
Well, somebody in the comments is asking why Shakhtar are going great. I presume that's to me saying I'd be upset if we don't win. Celtic should be beating Shakhtar, whether they play well or not. They have one or two very good players, most notably that left winger that tore us apart a couple of times. But they're also missing a couple of key players tomorrow night as well. And Celtic should have beaten them away from home. And if we're going to take ourselves seriously in any sort of way in European football, I'm okay with writing off the Real Madrid and RB Leipzig games as good performances that you'll learn from going forward. But Shakhtar, for me, are a side that Celtic should be measuring themselves against, in that is a winnable game, and especially with how Celtic pride themselves in good performances at home, that I think tomorrow night is a must-win game for Celtic, for Ange Postecoglou to prove that there is progress being made in Europe. They need to be beating a team that is level enough in quality to them. That I don't think that's an unreasonable argument.
Yeah, to me, outside, I mean, I came in thinking that the Leipzig games were going to be important litmus tests, as we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
I think that this, outside of maybe like a Scottish Cup final against Rangers theoretically or something like that, to me, this is the biggest game of the season. From a kind of a measuring stick of us doing what we should do against an opponent that we should beat in a game where the opponent has a style that is, easier than not versus our style. Meaning that if you go into this, to Alan's point, it's one game, who knows what's going to happen? Anything can happen. But with, all of the kind of direction of travel stuff in my mind, that we should really win this game. And I think, because of that, it would be concerning if we don't, in my view, because there is still this lingering concern I have about us scaling this up into Europe at this level. And when you're not winning the games against the opponents you should, that's why there's all those reasons and the externalities on the Bodo Glimt games last season. But those are the kind of games you should win, or at least come out of it against that kind of opponent. And Shakhtar, from a resource perspective, is obviously got a lot more than Bodo Glimt. From a quality of an opponent perspective, they're in the same neighborhood, like from an effectiveness basis. And if you adjust for style, I would say that this is really kind of that level of an opponent. So we should beat them in this game.
Yeah.
So I'm excited about the game because of that. I mean, I think it's a great test, and I'm excited to see us actually do what we should do.
Mm-hmm. The person in this comment, I think it's Jimbo. I've not got my glasses on. He said that he'll be there tomorrow, but won't be throwing his toys out of the pram if Celtic lose. I'm not going to be calling for Ange Postecoglou's head if Celtic don't win the game. But I think it's fair enough that we want to expect to win some of these games in the Champions League as well. And I think the key thing that I want to see is just not Celtic having 17 shots, 10 of them on target, and 1 goal. What I mean?
Yeah, but
that's my main point from tomorrow.
But similarly, I don't believe that just because we played well in Warsaw and dominated the game, that means we're going to win this game tomorrow. That's what I'm coming from. But equally, if we do have 17 shots and create like 6 big chances and have XG of 2.5 and we lose 1-0, I'm still in a place where I will accept that as a good performance.
Agreed.
Right? Yeah. That's where I am.
I disagree with that. I'm not going to sit on the fence on this game, because I think what this year was a learning curve in the Champions League. That's what you can say. You learn as you go. Each game you should be improving, and this is Celtic's 5th game in the Champions League this season against a side that are not a team that, like RB Leipzig, who have an 80 million player just sitting on, as their starting lineup. They're not a team that are packed with absolute superstars that would make it into most Premier League sides. Shakhtar are a side that are level to Celtic when it comes to resources and quality, from a league that's similar enough in quality to the best teams in Scotland. And this is Celtic's 5th game, Ange Postecoglou's 5th game in the Champions League now. They need to be learning to the point where they're winning games against this level of opposition. Not against RB Leipzig, not against Real Madrid, but against Shakhtar Donetsk and everyone else that's going to be coming up against them in the likes of the Europa League or Conference League. That's my expectations for Celtic in Europe.
No, and that's fair. And but they haven't won. This group hasn't won one game yet. So in terms of learning, they don't even have that experience of one win. Shakhtar have actually won one win, and actually they've won more than that. And if you go back over the last few years, where they have had experience at this level, so they're way more experienced than us at this level, by the way. So no, all I'm saying is that if the performance dips and we're giving up loads of chances, we're naive in our pressing, our defensive spacing is all over the place. Really, what happened in Leipzig is repeated, then I'm going to be really annoyed, and I don't care what the score is. Right? We could win 1-0 on that basis, and I'd still be disappointed and calling out all these things. Equally, if we restrict them to like one long-range shot, which goes in the top corner, and we absolutely batter them and their goalkeeper has a worldie, and we create loads of chances and lose 1-0, I'm not going to be happy, but I'm going to be content that from a performance basis, if we carry on like that, we will get our rewards. That's that's really what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, that's fair enough. That's fair enough. Shall we wrap this up? Anything else you just want to get off your chest before we get into the...
I just want to lobby for us not doing a VAR segment every week, because I suspect if we wanted to do that, it could become a regular part of the show, because this is going to be an absolute debacle.
No, I agree with that, and we will not be doing a referees watch. I will say that referees watch is honestly the worst segment in Sky Sports. I hated myself for watching it. I'm pretty sure it's just people who have nothing else to do during the day.
People hung over from 2 days of drinking. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, that's how I ended up watching the ref watch on Sky Sports at the weekend. Well, gentlemen, thanks very much.
Because in England, presumably, because they vet the referees in terms of allegiances and so forth, they don't have any. I'm not aware they wouldn't deliberately have a conflict of interest. That referees will make mistakes, and what happens in that respect is that you'll get a random distribution of errors across all the teams, pretty much. And if that was the case in Scotland, I think we'd be fine with it.
The entire way through the United Fergie, sort of when they were absolutely dominant in the Premier League, the age-old thing was Howard Webb was a United fan and he shouldn't be allowed to referee games. Things like that used to go on as well. So, I mean, you'll always have that. Their bias is always against the team you're generally supporting.
He's from Sheffield, by the way.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know who he supports, actually. I've never met him, but
I think he might actually be a United fan. That was the funny thing about it. Gentlemen, thanks very much.
Thanks, guys. Enjoy the game tomorrow. Yep.
Yeah, well, I'll try my best. And thank you to everyone who is watching live. Loads of people watching and loads of people commenting as well. Keep the comments coming underneath the video when it finishes up. If you want to get this show on podcast, you can get us on iTunes or Spotify. And if you're new to the channel, you can subscribe to the channel and get notified every time a video goes live. So we will be looking back at hopefully a Celtic win against Shakhtar. Otherwise, I'll be very upset on the next podcast. But that will be coming probably later on this week or maybe early next week. But we'll keep you posted on our Twitter page, which you can find at Huddle Breakdown as well. So thank you for watching, listening, and we'll chat to you whenever we record the next podcast. Good luck.